the town where an entire family vanished overnight. In the quiet heart of America, tucked between endless fields of corn and winding back roads, there stood a town so ordinary, so unremarkable, that most people might have forgotten it even existed. But this little town carries a secret that has haunted its people for over 60 years. This was not a place where crime flourished, not a town plagued by corruption, violence, or fear. It was the kind of town where families left their doors unlocked at night, where neighbors waved from their porches, and where children rode bicycles down Main Street long after the sun had dipped below the horizon. But in the fall of 1959, the town's innocence was shattered. It began with a family, the Johnsons. Harold Johnson was a quiet, hard-working man. He spent his days at the local factory, coming home every evening to sit at the head of the dinner table with his wife and 3 children. Margaret, his wife, was known for her warm smile, her freshly baked bread, and the way she cared not only for her family but for anyone who knocked at her door. Together, they had 3 children. Susan, just 12, bright and curious. Peter, 9, who loved to collect marbles and was always scuffed from play. And little Emma, only 6 years old, a girl with golden curls who followed her siblings everywhere they went. To their neighbors, they were the perfect picture of American life in the 1950s. Church on Sundays, barbecues in the summer, school recitals in the fall. They lived in a modest 2-story house, painted white with green shutters, and for all the world, they were happy. But one cold November night, everything changed. It began quietly. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman who lived next door, noticed the Johnsons' lights were still on after midnight. She found it odd. The Johnsons were not night owls. By 10 o'clock, the children were usually tucked in, Margaret's knitting was set aside, and Harold was preparing for another early morning at work. But on this night, the lights burned late. She shrugged it off at first. Everyone had restless nights. The next morning, however, Mrs. Thompson grew uneasy. There was no sound of the Johnson children leaving for school. No sight of Harold driving to the factory. By evening, neighbors realized something was wrong. When the police entered the Johnson home, what they found only deepened the mystery. The dining room table was set for 5. Plates filled with food sat untouched, as though the family had been interrupted in the middle of their meal. A pot of coffee rested on the stove, long since gone cold. In the living room, Margaret's knitting lay across the couch, a pair of needles still tangled in yarn. Harold's wallet and car keys rested on the counter, undisturbed. Upstairs, the children's beds were neatly made, pajamas folded carefully at the foot, as though waiting for bedtime that never came. The radio in the kitchen hummed softly, still playing. Nothing was missing, nothing was out of place, and yet, the Johnson family was gone. Police searched the house for signs of forced entry. None were found. No broken windows, no splintered doors. It was as though the family had simply vanished. The search began immediately. Police dogs were brought in, their handlers confident they could track the family's movements. The dogs led investigators out the back door, across the yard, and into the nearby woods. But then, inexplicably, the trail ended. Just stopped. It was as if the family had stepped into the trees and disappeared into thin air. Witnesses began to come forward. One woman swore she saw the Johnsons that night, walking hand in hand down the street, their faces blank, their steps slow, like sleepwalkers moving in silence. Another neighbor claimed to hear children laughing in the woods around midnight, though no children were outside at that hour. Each account added to the unease. Rumors spread quickly. Some whispered that the Johnsons had been taken by a secret cult. Strange symbols had been carved into trees near the woods for years, dismissed as pranks, but now they seemed darker. Others pointed to reports of UFOs in the county that week, strange lights in the sky, a humming sound that rattled windows, unexplained power outages. And then there were those who believed something darker, something human. Perhaps the Johnsons had been silenced because they stumbled onto a secret they weren't supposed to know. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The Johnson home stood frozen in time, untouched, a ghostly reminder of what had happened. The food on the table rotted. Dust gathered on the untouched knitting. Posters of the Johnson family were pinned to telephone poles and hung in store windows, but not a single trace of them was ever found. Relatives were questioned. Friends, co-workers, church members, everyone. Yet there was no clue. The Johnsons had no enemies, no debts, no reason to leave, and yet they were gone. As months passed, new stories began to spread. Hikers in the woods claimed they saw ghostly figures, a man, a woman, and 3 children, walking silently in a line. Always the same formation, always vanishing when approached. Hunters spoke of voices carried on the wind, children's voices, faintly calling for their mother. And then there were the lights. Candlelight flickering deep in the forest. Always just out of reach. Always disappearing the moment it was followed. The Johnson house itself became a place of dread. No one wanted to live there. Every attempt to sell it failed. Those who entered described an unnatural coldness, the sensation of being watched, and footsteps on the stairs when no one was there. Even today, those who pass by at night swear they see lights in the windows, though the electricity was cut off decades ago. The disappearance of the Johnson family changed the town forever. Doors were no longer left unlocked. Children no longer played outside after dark. The laughter that once filled the streets was gone, replaced by whispers and fear. The case remains unsolved. Official records list them as missing persons, but the townspeople do not believe they simply left. Something happened that night, something no one could explain. And so, the Johnson family remains a ghost story, a cold case, an enduring mystery that refuses to fade. A family that sat down to dinner one evening in the warmth of their home, only to step into the darkness and never return. What happened to them? Were they taken? Did they walk willingly into the night? Or were they pulled into something we cannot yet understand? Until the truth is uncovered, the story of the Johnsons will continue to haunt anyone who hears it.